Hello, and welcome to Capital H, the podcast where we explore the most important issues shaping the future of work, talent, and leadership. I'm your host, Kyle Forrest. Today, I'm joined by Brandon Carson, the Chief Learning Officer at Docebo, a company known for its innovative learning platform and commitment to reshaping how organizations develop talent at scale. In this episode, we'll discuss Docebo's recent strategic alliance with Deloitte, the company's mission and evolving vision, and the exciting innovations they're bringing to market, including their AI-powered learning agent, Harmony. Brandon, thank you for being here and spending time with us on Capital H. Let's start with just a little bit of an introduction about yourself and your role at Docebo.
Yes, I sure can. Thanks for having me, Kyle. This is really an honor to be here with you. I joined Docebo as their Chief Learning Officer. It's an inaugural role for the company. It's the first time that they've brought on a Chief Learning Officer. I joined earlier this year, and what drew me here is the clarity of purpose. So leveraging technology to make learning smarter, faster, and more human-centered. So it was really an opportunity to not only join a great growing company, but to also bring a lot of thought leadership and innovation and connectivity to our customers and communities and partners as we're facing such an inflection point in the practice. We've built a 20-year reputation, the company Docebo has, as a learning innovator. And today, like you've said, we're pioneering a new chapter where AI, automation, and skills intelligence aren't just trends, but enablers of workforce performance. So I'm really excited to be here. My focus right now in why we're investing in this role of a Chief Learning Officer is because providing a learning platform in today's world is not enough. We want to partner with our customers to drive real outcomes, whether that's AI readiness, faster onboarding, authentic leadership development, or preparing their teams for the future of work. So my role is architected to provide strategic direction and actionable playbooks and activities to optimize and modernize their L&D functions to help them with that and be a catalyst for creating a culture of learning across the organization, which we know now is really important for all companies. So Alessio, our CEO, told me when I came on, we now are a learning company, not just a technology company. And we know now with what's happening with emerging technology, every company, regardless of size, now has to be a learning company as well. So that's the genesis and kind of reasoning for this role. And I'm really excited to be their inaugural CLO.
Yeah, well, Brandon, I love your comment there about being a learning company and every company having to be a learning company. And I think Docebo is lucky to have you, given your career as a Chief Learning Officer in the space, at the number of organizations, the size and the scale of organizations that you've been at. And I think what is so important is that recognition about every company, regardless of industry sector, needing to be a learning company. When you look at, I know this is something that many folks talk about, the top 10 skills the World Economic Forum puts out, for example, that people need to focus on. 9 of the 10 are things like creativity, curiosity, decision-making, and those tied to learning, right? And I think I've even heard people say is learning the overall meta skill. And so what's unique, right, if folks probably maybe don't know, haven't done the research, like Docebo's name as a company translates to I will teach, which is a pretty powerful message. So can you share a little bit more about the company's mission, how that's evolved over time, like what the transition is like from being a technology company to a learning company?
Yes, and that is exciting when I learned too that it's Latin for I will teach. And it's funny because the pronunciation is sometimes challenging for people. We hear Docebo or Docebo or Docebo. So I will help everyone here. It is Docebo, and it translates from Latin as I will teach, which literally captures the spirit of the company from the beginning. The mission has always centered on making learning more accessible, relevant, and meaningful, whether for customers, partners, or employees. So one of the things about Docebo that I loved is since its founding in Italy in 2005, it has really focused on what the learning experience should be. And and yes, it's grown into a global platform. It's trusted by some of the world's most complex organizations and used by some of those organizations. But what has evolved is our ambition now. So
Yeah.
shifting from this traditional LMS and moving to more of a powerful learning suite that is driven by AI, powered by AI, but it's there to support 100% continuous learning at scale. And so that's what attracted me, given my past in helping to implement some of the first LMSs in the space. And all these years later, being frustrated because the experience hasn't evolved with the needs of the customer, which are the learners, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what I loved about that. And our focus today really is not about just delivering content, but enabling performance. And so that's the conversation we're having. And we've pivoted. What it means to become a learning company now is to have a strong perspective on what the future of L&D really needs to be. So it's really an exciting time. It's an exciting time, but I love the company's mission and how it's evolved over time.
Yeah. Well, and Brandon, when I was at Inspire and listening to your keynote and then your Chief People Officer Lauren's keynote, it was touching on the change that is happening within organizations, the need to learn, right? To navigate through that change, to create the space to learn, the time and focus to learn, what that means for careers, right? And so much of what is happening when organizations are investing millions of dollars around AI or any technology, if they don't see a return on investment, is because there was not a behavior change. Well, how do you get a behavior change? People learn to do something different. And so, Brandon, I'd be interested in a little bit of your comment around the evolution of learning, the space, the profession, et cetera, because depending on what you read on a week-to-week basis, there are people who are like, it's the end of L&D as we know it, which makes for a nice headline, but it is absolutely not the end of learning. And in fact, as you noted earlier, learning is more important than ever and developing people is more important than ever. So there's somewhere between kind of the headline and the reality that I'd love your thoughts on.
Yeah, it's a great question and a great kind of thought point on where we are. Like I mentioned earlier, about every company must be a learning company. But what that really means is that everyone, from the CEO to the frontline worker, needs to place a premium on
Yep.
continuous learning.
Yep.
And so this is what we're doing now is as a practice. And this is probably the biggest transformation this practice will undergo or has undergone since we became a practice in the corporate functions, right? Corporate enterprise. We are moving away from the manufacturing era operating model of work. So that in a lot of our work systems, physical and digital, and our constructs and our organizational design is still based on that manufacturing era operating model where scalable efficiency is the primary goal. Let's get costs out.
Yep.
Let's make sure the workforce knows how to do these tightly specified routine tasks and perform them for high productivity and efficiency. But that operating model, which we're having a hard time transitioning, we are doing it, we will do it. L&D actually will lead, for the first time ever, it will lead a new work operating model. That means every part of the work operating model needs to be thought of differently. And
Yep.
the half-life of skills, to your point, is shortening. And it's imperative that the workforce at every level becomes more adaptable and agile to how they learn and take on new skills. And there's complexity in that. It's not easy. It's easy to say that on these kinds of things. But when you have large workforces, technology alone is not going to solve for that. And
Yeah.
so we have to have a culture shift in these organizations before we can truly become a learning company.
Yeah. Well, and Brandon, one of the things that comes to mind for me with what you just shared is how do leaders and organizations make the implicit explicit? It's very easy as a worker or a leader to see the headlines of half-life of skills are shrinking, disruption is constant. Here's yet another change that's happening, whether technological or other. What do I do to stay on top of it? And I think inherent in your story is how do you say it is critical for us to make the time and space to learn, and here's how we will enable that? I think it is too easy to say, hey, people, learning is important and part of your role. Please learn, right? And it is another thing, to your point, to set up the systems, like the work systems that make learning fundamental to how an organization is driving business outcomes, right? And so maybe, Brandon, I'd even be interested in, as you look forward, there's probably some myths related to the L&D function and where it's headed that you might dispel, or even a perspective on where you think the function and profession is headed that I'd be interested in your take on. Because when I at Inspire or other places, when I see the number of people there passionate about driving learning at their respective organizations, I know there are so many people committed to bringing the best of their colleagues and workforce out, right? And sometimes what they're battling is just either the perception of learning
Mhm.
or has the right importance been put on it.
No, this is the actual, you've captured in a nutshell, the actual conversation that matters most right now. And basically what we're talking about is moving the corporate L&D function from the support service to the strategic lever. I can guarantee you there's not a CEO when they put their head on the pillow every night that is not concerned about whether or not their workforce can execute on the strategies that they are assertively implementing when it comes to AI, right? And so this is a turning point. And for decades, L&D has been focused on success in the business meant humans doing the same thing faster, cheaper, and more predictably. And that really is not going to work as we go forward, where the exponential advancement of technology in the workplace and ways of working and literally operating models for the business transition and change. And so AI is going to reshape almost everything about the workplace. And
Yep.
so this has to be a real intentional focus from leaders at every level, but it's got to start at the top. And one thing I was talking about with a CEO just a couple of days ago, a smaller company CEO, and they've got about a little less than 6,000 employees across the company, a global employee audience. And what's the number one kind of component that's going to fuel their drive to modernize and optimize and be in the right place when it comes to the market is this essence of what I call scaling to one. So this is the term
Yep.
I use a lot. And that's taking that move, that intentional move away from scalable efficiency to scalable learning. And so it has to come
Yeah.
from the top, where the C-suite, the executive teams, they focus on how can we learn faster at scale? How can we create the infrastructure for new value creation? And to your point earlier, you mentioned curiosity, you mentioned critical thinking, you mentioned the humanity in the work, the moving us away from those routine, specialized tasks that now the machines will take on. And so then what's
Yep.
left for the humans? Well, then there's a lot more opportunity for value creation from the humans, right?
Yep.
So how do we delegate that efficiency to machines so that we can keep humans focused on creativity? That's not going to just serendipitously happen. There has
Yep.
to be an intentional focus on redesigning the organizational structure, redesigning the operating model for the company. And one of the areas I'm advocating is let's redesign L&D.
Yep.
It's a little bit of a let's run with the business, or let's be a little reactive to the business. That is not going to be the future of how L&D needs to remain as we move
Yep.
forward. So what we're calling for is let's build a new L&D system that can actually drive this transformation and almost be the center of excellence for how that transformation occurs across the enterprise. And that's
Yeah.
not just put a new LMS in, that is take that technology stack that's necessary, take that learning platform, and really make that a partner to the business in driving the transformation. And so I'm not being negative on what L&D has been doing for the last 30 years, because you can
Right.
look at some of the market caps, you can look at some of what's happened in the business, and that is not by accident. And
Yep.
so L&D has been there at the forefront of a lot of these technology evolutions. If you think back to where you were on New Year's Eve 1999, right? We were all worrying about Y2K and the turnover, what was going to happen. Is everything going to
Yep.
shut down, right?
Yep.
We were involved in that as a practice. I remember that. We were heavily involved in that. And then as our worries and fears were averted, we then began the process of moving to the cloud. And so in the
Yep.
ensuing 25 years, a generation, we have moved almost 100% of business data to this thing we invented called the cloud. That
Yep.
literally is a transformation that doesn't get a lot of conversation, but it was the biggest transformation for IT and business ever, probably even since we
Yep.
put computers on desktops, right? But here we are again. And so L&D needs to not continue to exist in an operational silo. It
Yep.
must be woven into the fabric of the business, because this is not just about updating skills. It's about determining how AI and humans can effectively work together, because this is a transformational shift. AI is not technology. It's a transformational shift. And
Yeah.
I think we have the ability, capability, and hunger as a practice and as a function within the enterprise to take this on. And I was even in
Yep.
my prior role, I was recommending that our CHRO become the executive sponsor for AI transformation across the organization and bring all the
Yeah.
functions
Yeah.
together, right? Because HR is in a unique, in L&D, HR and L&D is in a unique position, because we span the enterprise focusing on the humanity of the work. Leverage us, let us drive, or at least be a key part of this transformation as it goes forward. So I think we're ready. I think we're going to do it, but I do think we have to rethink and rescope and reinvent the practice.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, I think your kind of call to action about the rescoping, the rethinking is what I've certainly seen. I've discussed with CHROs, HR leaders, business leaders myself, seen others posit the tremendous opportunity for, I'll call it the HR function profession at large, inclusive of L&D, to say, let's use this moment to lead from the front and show the enterprise how this could be done, right? And to say, if we are responsible collectively for helping humans work better, whether that's external talent coming in, internal talent redeploying, you name it, let's start by showing the way, right? And to your point about AI not being another technology, there's then even your reference to cloud. I've started to hear many people go back and say, okay, what are some transformational technologies and general purpose technology, right? That just fundamentally shifted the world of work. And people start with electricity and they're like, you didn't flip the switch in the factory and all of a sudden you're working differently. You had to reorganize the factory floor. You needed to, what do 3 8-hour shifts look like? All these things that took time to spin up, but it took 40 odd years. Then the desktop, then the mobile phone, then the cloud, right? And the duration shrunk in terms of how rapidly that changed things. But one of the interesting things, of course, like you could look at cloud and then the generation of software businesses, which spun up more learning, partner enablement, customer enablement, sales enablement in new and different ways for teams, product enablement. Like actually, there's more learning in the business, right? For end customers or the partner ecosystem, you name it. It's just maybe coming from different areas. So the macro of learning, the importance is still there. Yet at the same time, a central L&D function perhaps has not always had the opportunity or the recognition or the impact that it drives. So maybe even, Brandon, if I take all of that and then think about like Docebo launching Harmony, there's this AI human and machine blueprint or template for how the work can evolve going forward. So maybe even through the lens of something like Harmony, how do you see like the AI plus human work changing for L&D going forward? And how can that be a template for driving change within the broader enterprise?
Yeah, no, this is great. So if you think about Harmony, it's a strategic evolution. So it's moving Docebo from a learning platform to what I would call a learning partner. So just a little bit about Harmony. Harmony uses Gen AI to automate content curation, assist administrators, and personalize learning experiences in real time. And that's going to have a big impact on two fronts. First, it's going to reduce the manual workload on L&D teams.
Yep.
And so that reducing the manual workload on L&D teams from the administration point is going to let them focus more on strategy and impact rather than operations. I mean, there'll always
Yep.
be learning operations, but this will reduce that load that L&D teams take on or some IT teams take on to do that. So second, Harmony helps drive outcomes because it's going to deliver more relevant learning to the workforce and or whoever is supported through the learning faster. So that's
Sure.
why we see it more as a partner that raises both the speed and quality of learning. So if you remember when I was talking about scalable learning, how do we learn faster at scale? How do we get the
Yep.
organization? And when we say learn faster, we're not saying you just got to take in all this information and get it. What we're saying is you need more contextual and personalized learning that meets you where you are, right?
Yep.
Which we've talked about for the last 20 years in L&D of how do we get hyper personalized learning. Well, the gift of AI is that's really what it's all about. And so Harmony unleashes that power of personalization, if you will. And so it's critically important that L&D embraces this moment, right? Because to our earlier conversation, they are now the architect and orchestrator of the future of work because
Yep.
you've got a workforce that is no longer going to look at learning as the transaction they've got to go do so they can get back to work. And then as AI matures, it's going to become the tool in the coworker. And so in I keep talking about my prior in a prior role, we were flummoxed with the one unlock that we know is the most powerful for manager enablement and leadership development, and that's coaching. You're
Yep.
flummoxed with coaching because with 10,000 store managers, how do you unleash that at scale? And it's really hard to have one-on-one coaching with managers to enable them when you've got to do all the scheduling of humans and get them connected and then the expense of that many coaches. AI coaching is going to unlock a
Yeah.
lot of capability for managerial enablement and for leadership development. In fact, we tested with over 60 district managers AI coaching in a pilot project for like 90 days. And there were instant results from it in how they were able to connect to their direct reports, have more effective conversations and one on
Yep.
ones, and really think more intentionally about those conversations and how it motivated their direct reports to be more connected to what was important for them to achieve in the job. And
Yeah.
so if you think about the frontline workforce and really any workforce, unleashing that at scale is going to get to that organizations need to learn faster at scale, right? And so we see that as the synergy between what you talked about, HI. We see HI as human innovation
Yep.
plus AI, which is artificial intelligence. So AI coaching, for example, will be one of those unlocks. Harmony is one of those unlocks that's going to really allow people to focus more on the strategy of learning and to your point on the ROI, how do we get outcomes that matter? How do we align to the business metrics that are the most important so that we don't just spray and pray the entire workforce with tons of learning that they need to spend a lot of time on? How do we really individualize it and make it relevant, meaningful for that individual? But also, how do we make it simpler and more effective? And
Yep.
then the other component to that, though, is not just to skill the individual. So for the last 50 years, the L&D practice has focused on we're going to give the individual the skills they need to do the work. The future of work is more about teams working together to achieve what they need to achieve, right? And so how do we add that extra component, which is really important for the complexities of the future of work? Because AI is not necessarily going to simplify work. Work is going to get more complex, especially in the short
Yep.
run. So how do you enable teams And so these are the things that keep us up at night when we're thinking about, okay, software technology is the means to the end. How do we build in the intelligence to make sure that we amplify what's important and take away the drudgery and automate that so that the learning management system really becomes that thoughtful partner that helps people learn faster at scale? That's the number one thing that's going to drive business value, which is going to lead to competitive advantage.
Yep. Well, and Brandon, I think at the core of some of what you said, not only can you unlock capacity in the learning professionals, there's then capability to deploy coaching at scale through the AI, but also now by unlocking capacity in the learning professionals for when you need to go past the AI, the humans can scale even farther than they originally could, right? So there's all these knock-on effects that are beneficial from bringing those capabilities together, which are pretty powerful and incredible for where the profession can go. And so, Brandon, you shared about Docebo's evolution from a technology company to a learning company, a little bit about like where the learning profession is headed and the ability to have this outsized impact on the organization now. It's been an exciting year for Docebo when you layer in the Harmony announcement, FedRAMP certified, which for folks who aren't aware is a major milestone for software organizations to serve into the public sector, the alliance that Docebo and Deloitte also announced. So as you kind of look forward for the business, what are some things that you and Alessio and the Docebo leadership are excited for on the horizon for your ability to drive value for your customers, partners, and potential customers?
I love that question. One of the things we're not overly focused on is wrapping ourselves around the annual trends in the industry. So when you think about, okay, the L&D trends for 2025 and for 2026, right? So we're not really
Yep.
going to be trend based. We've been doing this for 20 years. We've had lots of ebbs and flows in our practices. L&D as a practice is usually the first to look at the bling of what may be new, right? Which I think is important. But we're in a wholesale rescoping of what our value proposition is in L&D.
Sure.
And so many C-level leaders see the intrinsic differentiator that learning brings to the enterprise. I think it manifested itself much more during COVID, where a lot of CEOs were like, wait, where's that CHRO? Where's that CLO? We need to have conversations, right? So what we've been doing is really looking at how do we help lead or take companies on the journey through. Candidly, this is a renaissance period. So like I said earlier, we're having to reimagine the practice and its impact. But we're in a place now where our clients, our customers are not just asking us to install a platform, they're really asking us to help them democratize learning, look at learning as a faster throughput for the organization. They understand the context in which work occurs is critically important. So how do we wrap all of these things around the organizational shift that's happening? And I think every software provider is going to have these existential conversations with themselves, because what is happening, like I said earlier, is we're moving assertively away from that one-size-fits-all learning, which has been a scourge on the workforce for the last 20 years.
Yep.
And, a lot of us got into the role of just checking the box and driving the transaction. And too many functions, L&D functions, have become resource constrained and content factories and that kind of thing. That's just not going to be doable in the future. And so that's where we as a company see a responsibility that's beyond the technology to really help companies understand that to become a learning company is more than just implementing technology. It is a cultural shift. And so we've been an innovator in this space, but this is now wholesale transformation. And so as we evolve ourselves as a learning company and integrate more intelligence into our products, we do see the need that, no, we have to listen to our customers more. We have to have more conversation with our customers. We have to help them evolve their practices as well.
Yep.
And so it's a new role for technology providers in a lot of ways. So we're going to help companies architect the next generation of their operating model. And if you think about legacy companies versus, with older operating models, some still vestiges from the manufacturing age era. And then you compare that to what will start to happen, which is already happening in some respects, these AI native business models that are coming to fruition. There's going to be a lot of tension in how companies can make sure that the legacy companies can still make sure that they can drive competitive advantage when they're watching these new AI first operating models come to life as well. And so what we're saying is, let us help you on that journey, because we've got the platform. The platform is scalable. It's great. It's enterprise ready. But everything that wraps around that to drive the move away from efficiency to adaptability, when you think about learning and how you want to propagate that across the enterprise, all of that changes. So we're in a place now where L&D across so many organizations, HR itself, they're not like, a good friend of mine told me once, like, no, Brandon, we've been talking about seat at the table for 20 years. Now we are the table. So we are setting the table in the corporate space, and Docebo is in that conversation. And that's one reason I'm here, but that's one reason we were seeking all of the AI integrations we're making into the product. We're bringing more intelligence into the product, but we're also saying to our customers and to companies, hey, we're going to do this because this is where we see it going. But now we're also going to work with you to help you get there and to help you understand and implement these changes within your organization. So, exciting.
Awesome. Brandon, anything else you want to make sure that we get that we haven't gotten out?
Yeah, I can probably feel the passion talking to you, Kyle. I love this conversation. Could go on for hours. I think, though, and this is one thing that's really important, especially for us as practitioners, we need to look back in our history to find our way forward. And I think that we've had a fantastic 50 years as a function within the corporation. We have added so much capability and, to your point, capacity to allow businesses to evolve as they have, right? So the practice is very necessary. And like anything else, we're in yet another time of change. We're in a time of transformation. So don't let go of our past, but let's take our past and leverage what we've learned from that to build a new future for the practice and for the businesses and for the employees and customers and all of those people that we support. So that's always want to remember that the next 5 years is going to be more transformational for L&D than the last 50. It's a great time to be in this space, but let's don't forget that how we got here is going to help us move towards that transformation of the next 5 years.
Yeah, Brandon, I love that. I am an optimistic person by nature. So ending on a note of positivity and hope and optimism for the future, I think is a tremendous. And some of that is, folks, you just got to get comfortable being uncomfortable and lean into the change and learn, right? And make time to learn. So Brandon, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your thoughts and perspectives on Capital H and everything that's happening at Docebo. That's just incredibly exciting right now. To our listeners, thanks again for tuning in to Capital H. Make sure to continue to stay involved and giving us feedback on the topics, the trends, and we really appreciate you for being part of the conversation on the future of work and the future of learning and the future of humans. So thanks again, folks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kyle.
This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.